What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the Season 3 premiere of the Orville New Horizons from writer-director Seth MacFarlane. And it's been a little bit since we had a chance to talk about this show. I think roughly 3 years, and obviously a lot has happened in that time. Fox got consumed and absorbed by Disney, and then COVID hit, which caused all kinds of delays. And as far as the show is concerned, we lost the great Norm Macdonald, who plays Yaphet. And Norm Macdonald, that dude's been making me laugh basically my entire adult life. I guess my earliest memory of him would be in Billy Madison. Billy Madison was one of those movies that, for whatever reason, we watched it dozens of times in college. We would quote it back and forth to each other. Love Norm Macdonald. He's dearly missed. But luckily, he did record all of his scenes as Yaphet for this season prior to his untimely demise. So he is here front and center in the Season 3 premiere. And very appropriately, this Season 3 premiere is dedicated to the memory of Norm Macdonald. So there's been quite a few roadblocks and obstacles in front of the Orville in terms of getting back onto the screen. And all I'll say is that I have missed the show dearly. There's so many reasons to love and adore this show, but I think more than anything, it just represents a triumph of that old school 1 hour TV format where you can pop in and out of this show for a standalone episode and have a great time and not have to commit 14 hours of your life to fully appreciating what it's all about. Obviously, if you are a fan, then you want to do the deep dive on every single episode. But what's strange is that now the Orville is over on Hulu, and obviously Hulu doesn't really broadcast shows in that traditional format, so it's not like you're going to be channel surfing and stumble upon an episode of the Orville. That said, I do appreciate the fact that they're still going for these tight 1 hour chunks with great economy of storytelling where a few characters get to hog the spotlight for that particular story, and then you're out, and then you can kind of cleanse your palate and get ready for the next story the following week. So prior to watching this latest episode, last night I decided to rewatch Identity Part 2, which was for me the high watermark of Season 2. That space battle in that episode, it makes me happy. It gives me chills. I feel pure glee just seeing all the different character beats throughout that battle. It's funny how, people always compare this show to Star Trek: The Next Generation, but obviously at this point, the Orville is almost like a pastiche of different influences, particularly Star Wars and Star Trek, of just what are the key sci-fi stories that influenced Seth MacFarlane while he was growing up. And he's managed to imbue this show with kind of the best of all of his formative influences. And so I think it's very reductive or overly simplistic to refer to the Orville as a Star Trek kind of parody show. It's not. If anything, it's way better than Star Trek these days, so I don't even watch the new Star Trek shows anymore. But I will keep coming back for each and every single episode of The Orville as long as Seth MacFarlane chooses to make this show. But speaking of that episode, Identity Part 2, this latest episode kind of picks up right where that one left off with the aftermath or the consequences of Isaac's betrayal of basically the human race. And also, before I go any further, I should say spoilers are totally fair game in this review because the episode's now available on Hulu. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. But the episode begins with a scene that we've had access to for months, which is this nightmare flashback scene where Dr. Claire Finn's son Marcus is sprinting through the Orville during that huge battle with the Kaylon. Is it Kaylon or Kaylons? I'm not sure if it's one of those situations where the plural is still written like the singular, but it's a glorious space battle and a vivid reminder of just how cool Season 2 was. Hopefully this season will manage to deliver more spectacle like that later in the season. But as we come to learn over the course of this episode, Marcus is not the only crew member who is basically traumatized by the resurrection or the reinstatement of Isaac. A lot of fan favorite characters like Malloy think it was a bad idea, and we also have a newcomer played by Ann Winters, Ensign Charlie Burke. And Charlie Burke, she was on another ship where they lost over 300 people, including her best friend. And she's a unique crew member because she has this very special ability of being able to visualize things in the fourth dimension, an ability that's going to be called upon later on in the episode. But overall, this is just a very sad, melancholy episode, seeing an individual like Isaac, who in theory is incapable of feeling human emotion, but everywhere he goes, he's confronted with graffiti calling him a murderer, or people in the cafeteria standing up and leaving the table when he approaches. Your heart just goes out to him because you feel like on some level, no matter how small and imperceptible it might be, that it's just killing him seeing the way people are reacting to him. And then it quite literally does when Marcus basically says, "I wish you were dead." And as a result, he decides to deactivate himself or kill himself. And as I was watching this episode, I was kind of surprised. I was like, God damn, this show's been away for 3 years. And you want to come back with this very sad, melancholy episode about suicide. And while I would have recommended that the show come back with a bang, with something a little bit more lighthearted and fun, this is the path that they chose. So at a minimum, emotionally, this episode really pulled on my heartstrings, because then we have the big debate over whether or not Isaac should be saved from his own suicide, because Lamar realizes there is a chance. However, the only way they can bring him back is if Charlie Burke is willing to cooperate, and Charlie Burke initially refuses to do so. She gets relieved of her duties, but then after a heart-to-heart with Marcus, she decides that she's going to play ball and help bring Isaac back to life. And I guess my favorite part of that whole drama was when Ed Mercer basically had one of those kind of classic late 80s, early 90s Jean-Luc Picard moments where he gives Charlie Burke a little bit of a talking to and tells her she does not have a monopoly on grief, and that her position on that front is starting to wear a little thin. I feel like the captain should always be in a position of giving a little tough love to his crew when needed. So dramatically, that was one of the more satisfying beats. But probably one of the more fun and exhilarating beats of this episode is when Malloy gets a chance to take for a test drive this new vessel. I think it's called the Pterodon, but it's very sleek, it's very elegant, it's very quick, it's very maneuverable. And then Burke gets a chance to try to take him out with these little drones. But it's always a nice reminder to see just how good a pilot Malloy is. But obviously the best scene with Malloy as a pilot, once again, goes back to Identity Part 2 in Season 2. But as far as other ingredients that I love this episode, while it's not something new to the show, I loved hearing that soaring orchestral score. You can just tell that Seth MacFarlane, he's a big fan of those late 70s, early 80s movies, many of which were either directed by or produced by Steven Spielberg, where you just had those giant orchestral scores. And this show always brings the heat on that front. But we had a nice little cameo by everybody's favorite large-headed alien Dan. He always makes me laugh like hell, even if he only has 1 or 2 lines. And we had a nice little dramatic battle when a Kaylon vessel drops out of nowhere, chases the Orville all over the place. They end up hiding in this atmosphere of this planet that's incredibly inhospitable, and they save themselves with this old school submarine warfare maneuver where they gather up all their torpedoes onto a shuttle, send it off to a safe distance away from the Orville, and then they blow it up and the Kaylon withdraw. It was a good old-fashioned like Captain Kirk moment that's always fun to see on the screen. But in the end, what sets the Orville apart from its competition is the comedy and the beats that made me laugh. There was one scene where we see Yaphet in a spacesuit, and just something about the sight of this giant gelatinous ooze talking from within a spacesuit, that just had me howling. But I think the best beat is when we see Lamar getting it on with this beautiful girl, but her body is covered head to toe in these little spikes. And he makes a reference to how he's bleeding around his hips, but I don't know if that's going to become a thing for people moving forward, but I don't think I will be alone in reacting in a very, excited fashion to just how hot she was. So yeah, I guess the only way you can recreate that in real life maybe would be with like a latex suit covered with little metal studs, but hopefully she will be a recurring character in the show because she is a total smoke show. And looking ahead to the rest of the season, it'll be interesting to see if there are any lingering effects from the messing around with the timeline at the end of the previous season. And I'll be curious to see what happens with Isaac and the rest of the crew moving forward. I have a feeling we'll get an episode at some point where Charlie Burke and Isaac are probably stuck on a ship or a desert island or whatever the case might be, where they'll be forced to work together and overcome their differences. Because as Claire points out at the end of the episode, it's very hard to hate people when they're up close. It's very easy to hate somebody else or another tribe or whatever if they're at a distance, but that'll be an interesting subplot, which I'm sure will continue to run throughout the season. And it's my big, sincere hope that this show will just thrive on this new platform. Who the hell knows if Hulu is the right place for it or whether or not the right crowd is going to follow it, but at a minimum, we've got one more season to enjoy. I couldn't be happier. Unfortunately, at least for the next 2 episodes, I will not be able to do weekly breakdowns or reactions because I'm going to be traveling the next 2 weeks when this show drops. But just know that I'll be rooting for it every step of the way, and periodically throughout the season. Whenever there's a good episode, I will definitely pop onto YouTube to celebrate the Orville for its greatness. So I feel like a congratulations is in order to Seth MacFarlane for bringing this show back. This really feels like his great personal passion project of his career, as much as like the early days of Family Guy were an absolute blast. Something about the Orville really seems to bring out the best in him. His love of great music, his love of great comedy, his love of great sci-fi. And yeah, the Orville is great sci-fi. People overlook just how good it is on that front due to its jokes. But if you were to strip away its jokes, it'd still be arguably one of the best sci-fi shows around. So I will be eagerly anticipating every single episode for the rest of the season, but I think I've said all I have to say for now. So thank you so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But I hope everyone enjoyed this latest episode as much as I did. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.